I expect that you're going to take out the trash each week. I expect that you're going to cook dinner for our family. I expect that we are going to go to church together as a family. Marriage expectations. Go ahead and take a deep breath. It's okay. But this is definitely a conversation that can trip couples up. And so today I talk with Genee Francis, the Assistant Director of Content and Programming for WinShape Marriage, about marriage expectations. She helps me bring clarity to this conversation. It is super fascinating. Let's get into it. Genee Francis, welcome back to the WinShape Marriage Podcast.
Thank you, Marlee.
So I know you have been a guest on our podcast before. You work with me on our marriage team.
Yes.
So I know who you are, but for any new listeners or viewers, just give a little bit about your background and tell them who you are and what you do.
So I'm Genee Francis, and I am on the WinShape Marriage team. I serve as the Assistant Director of Content and Programming. My background is in marriage and family, and I'm a licensed counselor. I've worked with couples since 2008. So just very excited to be here and be able to share a little bit with you today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so today we're going to be talking about marriage expectations.
Yes.
So what a topic.
What a topic. It's actually,
dive into.
It's such an important topic and one of my favorite topics with couples. And so I'm very excited for us to dig into this.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So in prepping for this conversation, just out of my own curiosity, I went and looked up what is the definition of expectation.
Yes.
And so I was like, let's just define our terms to get
Absolutely.
us started.
Let's do it.
And so the definition, according to Merriam-Webster, for expectation is the act or state of expecting.
Yes.
I was like, okay, well, that doesn't really tell me a lot. And then I looked up expect as a verb.
Sure.
And that was to consider probable or certain, to consider reasonable, to consider bound in duty or obligated.
Sure.
And so I kind of created from that my own little definition of marriage expectations. I'm curious what you think about it. So I said marriage expectations are things you believe are going to happen in your marriage, are reasonable things to anticipate, or are even things that you believe are obligations for your marriage.
Sure.
And so thoughts on that? What do you think?
I think all that can be true.
Okay.
You know, I think we all enter marriage with expectations. And so what I try to change out the word expectation.
Okay.
And so if I were to create a definition and use a synonym of expectation, what I would say is an assumption.
Okay.
Based on how a marriage should function, or maybe an ideal on how someone should behave.
Okay.
So I think you could apply both. And I think what you said was wonderful as well, because I think when people come into marriage, we all have an idea of how it should go or how we expect it to go. And I think the problem with all of that is the ideals or the assumptions or the expectations are based on so many different data points from so many different places.
Yes.
So you've got people who have expectations based on what they've seen, someone else's marriage, what they see on TV, what's trending on social media, right? How their parents functioned in marriage, or not. So you really have to be very careful when you take two people from two different places and try to come together on this thing called marriage. And then we both are walking in with expectations, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, from the jump, it can sound kind of like a tall order, a tall mountain to scale. And hopefully through this conversation, we'll help kind of bring the temperature down a little bit on that. And so I'm excited. But no, I appreciate your walking us through a definition as well. I just think to get started on this whole conversation, it's helpful that we're all on the same page of what we're actually talking about.
Sure.
So that we don't have false expectations about marriage expectations.
There we go.
So now that we have defined our terms, I'm curious, what would you say are some legitimate biblical marriage expectations?
Sure. So for a couple who are making the decision to come together in marriage, and they choose to follow, right, Christ and what has been outlined for us through the Word of God. I think some things that you can expect, for one, is mutual covenant relationship. Yeah. Right. And I think if we look at Genesis and we look at where the two become one, so they leave and cleave, a man and woman leave and cleave, and join together as one flesh, I think that in itself, right, will what you can expect from that is the mutual covenant relationship. And that covenant is so important because it is so much more than a contract that we sign, but it's a covenant relationship that we come into an agreement with each other, but most importantly with God. So I think that is the first thing that we can expect is this lifetime covenant between the two of us and God.
Yes, absolutely. Our pastor at church talks about this often, about this idea of contract versus covenant.
Yeah.
And a contract being that, you know, if you do something wrong, then like I'm out, like I can be out of the contract.
Sure.
And that is just not the case at all for a covenant. It is so much deeper and richer. And thank God for that.
That's right.
Thank you that he had a better idea, because if it was contractual, I mean, how quick could you just be in and out? I mean, you can sign contracts and get out of contracts, and there's TV shows about that, you know, and so it's so much cheaper than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the contrary to a legitimate biblical marriage expectation, what are some unrealistic marriage expectations that you've seen or heard in your work with couples?
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting because there's so many different things that people expect out of marriage leading up to it. And so the one thing, and it's probably a little cliche, but this idea that marriage will complete you. You know, and our identity as believers is in Christ. And so we, you know, if you think of yourself as a child of Christ and as an image bearer of Christ, we are already complete. Yeah. Right? When we come into this marriage. And so this idea that marriage will complete you, this idea that marriage will make you happy, right? This idea that marriage will elevate you just personally within yourself, you know, all of those things are marriage expectations. And a lot of times they're unspoken, but they come out in the way that we act or the way that we speak or the way that we posture. And so those are a few of them. The other thing that that comes out too is this idea that our spouse will be able to read our minds. Yeah. So this mind reading.
They know everything about us, right? They're the closest person to us.
That's right. And so I think that's a huge expectation, almost unspoken often, but an expectation nonetheless.
Absolutely. And to your point, a lot of those are unrealistic. Like it's unrealistic to think that your spouse is going to be a mind reader.
That's right.
It's unrealistic to think that your spouse is going to complete you. They are imperfect. Like there is no way
that
they can perfectly complete you in every need and every desire and wish that you would have. And so, I think what's important to remember about that is you might be thinking to yourself, like, I don't have those expectations. But to your point, a lot of times you haven't actually verbalized those out loud. They're just kind of like living in your head. And then you take some time to reflect and you think, oh, like maybe I have placed that unrealistic expectation on my marriage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So some expectations I think could be small, and some might be big. Maybe you have a small expation of my husband's always going to take out the trash. Like that's his job. That is an expectation that I have heading in. Maybe it's a much larger expectation. You know, he's going to be the one to lead our family or something like that. So what are some things you've seen that might fall into this category of like what might be a smaller marriage expectation that's like, okay, and then something that could carry a lot more weight. Sure.
And I try to encourage couples to be very careful about qualifying or even quantifying, you know, these things, because what's considered big to me may be small to you. What's considered small to you may be big to me. And so instead of looking at it like that, one way to kind of categorize these different differences of expectations is maybe preferences versus principles.
Oh, I love
right?
that.
Because when you think about something that we may consider small, if we're looking at it, those are probably more of our preferences, right? And so you use the idea of chores, which comes up all the time,
Yes.
right? But it may be very important. It may be my preference, right? To cook and you clean, right? But a principle is more like what you said in terms of, what was your example of the...
About like leading your family.
Exactly. So
like,
a principle may be, that the husband is supposed to lead the family. That may be a principle that you hold on true that is more. So I think when I think of it, I think of preferences versus principles. And I think about those things that are foundational to a marriage. Because we are two people coming together, a lot of our expectations and even our ranking of such is subjective based on our experience, again, based on what we've seen, based on what we're viewing, what we're hearing from our friends and family. And so if you can get a couple to move outside of that kind of outside noise and really kind of focus on each other, and one really good exercise is, list out what are your marriage expectations? Yeah. Like maybe your top 10 that come to mind in a very, lighthearted way, but let's look at it and then let's see where they overlap, right? Let's see where we disagree. Yeah. And then let's look at, is this more of a principle or this more of a preference? And then be able to kind of figure out like what is going to be our, maybe our top, from these principles, like how do we develop our top expectations that we share and we agree upon. So now they become more of maybe part of our vision statement or more of our the way that we decide to kind of organize our life.
And they're less of an expectation even at that point and become more of like a value
for
our marriage. They kind of transition from this is just an expectation that me as an individual was holding on to. Now we've had this conversation and we're really buying into this together of like, I really value that same thing. And then we can, we talk about it and then it's a expectation for our marriage, but it even takes some of that weight off. It's like, but we're like totally in alignment on this. It's more just a value for our family.
Absolutely.
And then there could be some fun in there too of like, I expect that you're always going to get the mail when you come home. And it's like, okay, like fine, I can do that.
Yeah.
And so there can be like some fun in that as
Absolutely.
well. But
Absolutely.
I love that. I love like listing out and thinking if you've never really thought through, you've heard this terminology, marriage expectations, and you haven't really put a ton of like dedicated thought to it, but sitting down with your spouse and saying, hey, we haven't really put like a ton of thought to this. Let's list out some of these things.
Absolutely.
So what a great idea and exercise that couples can do.
Because what you want to do in the two becoming one is you have to figure out how that walks out practically. And so, like you said, it moves from a posture of these are my expectations to now we have shared expectations, right? And that's the work of two becoming one.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a great segue into, I had a question that I wanted to ask for maybe the couple that's engaged or just dating, even preparing for marriage.
Yes.
How do you start having this conversation around marriage expectations in a healthy way? And how do you start communicating those things with your boyfriend or girlfriend or fiance? You haven't even gotten into you're not spouses yet.
Absolutely.
So you're having what might seem like a little bit of a tough conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's beautiful to have open, honest dialogue and often. But I think that, and maybe it's the therapist in me, but I recommend that every couple that is considering becoming engaged to marry go through premarital counseling.
Yep.
And the reason why is for reasons like this, like when we're talking about expectations, a lot of times conversation may or may not organically just flow into this space.
Yep.
But if you go to a premarital counselor, especially one that specializes in couples who are exploring marriage, then oftentimes they will use those assessments such as Prepare Enrich or SYMBIS or Couple Checkup. There's so many.
Yes.
But if they use one of those in-depth assessments, what it does is it plucks out so much helpful information for couples to be able to make informed decisions and to have very meaningful dialogue. So when you have an assessment such as Prepare Enrich and you're going through and you're looking at my thoughts, my feelings, my expectations on communication, finances, sexual expectations, family planning, family and friends, all these different areas that are so important to marriage, then when you have the results and you're able to really look at, right, where you sit versus your partner versus your boyfriend or girlfriend, then you're able to really know, like, these are the things that we need to discuss. Yeah. These are some areas where we should focus on aligning. Yeah. And so it's so informing, and I highly recommend that.
Yes. We did premarital counseling 7 years ago at this point, and we still talk about it. And it was such a fruitful, great experience for us. And so I also would highly recommend it for what it's worth.
That's right.
But I do remember what you're saying. It's like you kind of to the top of this conversation, you bring with you so much experience from your family, the way you were raised, and your fiance or boyfriend or girlfriend is bringing the same. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's right or wrong. It's just informed how you've thought about it differently. And so then being able to see it like laid out in front of you in this way. And then what's cool is that some of those things you're going to see automatically, like, oh, sweet. Like, we're on the same page on this.
That's
like
right.
We totally, the way we were raised or whatever, both of our parents were very, expressed a lot of physical touch in our house. Like we did a lot of hugging and everything. And so that's an easy thing that we both align on. We want to share that in our family, or, it might inform, but then on the flip of that, it could inform the opposite, right? Of like, oh, your family saved. Like, y'all didn't really go on vacation a lot. Like, your parents saved a lot of their money, and your family spent a lot. Y'all went and did. It doesn't mean that necessarily one was right or wrong.
That's right.
But it has informed how you might expect that you're going to be spending money. And what a beautiful conversation to have up front.
Absolutely.
Like, before you've ever even gotten deep into marriage, to say, wait a second, like, okay, this might be a place that we need to focus a little bit more time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll share a personal story. When my husband and I were dating, and one of the ways I knew that he was thinking about proposing is he began asking so many random questions. And it's interesting because based on his background, based on who he is, I would have never expected this, but he is very disciplined and very intentional, I would say, as a person. And so he began asking questions, but these are questions that you don't really hear about people asking, but just random things about, my interest or my expectations. Like, if you were to purchase a house today, what type of house would you purchase and why? Or if you were going to make a purchase of X, Y, and Z, like, why would you make that purchase and how would you go about making that purchase? But it helps to really pluck out some things that maybe are a little bit deeper beyond the surface. Because when we're dating, a lot of times it's la la land. And, we were long distance. And so we just had a good time while we had the time, because we may not see each other for a couple more weeks. And when we saw each other, there was always like a 48-hour countdown. Yes. So I think sometimes you can get caught up in the clouds, in the la la land is what I call it, and you don't really try to go beyond the surface because it just doesn't call for that. And so just being very intentional, I think, to sit down and have some focused talk beyond the surface is so important for couples.
Absolutely. What a great word. Okay, so whether you are engaged and you're in that season, or you're talking about it, and you see some of those things revealed and you realize some of those expectations are mismatched, or you are into marriage at this point.
Sure.
And so this might be like a 2-part question, and you take it, how you would like. But basically, when you do realize that there are some mismatched expectations going on, how would you advise approaching that?
Sure. I would start by just encouraging couples to name the expectation out loud. Name it. Say it, put it out there, and then sit with that. And I would say once you name it, be able to listen and share on both sides without judgment, without assessment, without any type of preconceived notion, but just being able to listen to understand is so important. And I think once you name it, I think the other thing that's important is be able to talk from your own perspective on why this is important, right? Or this is why I need, or this is why I expect that. So instead of pointing the finger, I think Gottman calls it, he calls it a soft startup.
Okay.
But instead of pointing the finger with accusations of what you need to do or what, all of that, it's like being able to own it and just talk from your own perspective about I need and this is why, and being able to have a conversation. So that would be the first step.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being able to align when there's a mismatch in expectations.
Okay.
And again, I think you have to sort out between the principles and the preferences.
Yes.
So going back to that, it's like, is this a preference or is this a principle? And then again, having conversation around that. And again, using that gentle startup to be able to say I, and, I think it's easier for your spouse to lean in when it's an I, So I would say to name it, to sort out principle versus the preference, and then again be able to try to figure out, how do we align, how do we compromise on this? Is this something that we can lean into one another on, or is this a non-negotiable, or is this something that because I think sometimes when we are seeking to love each other well, one of the other things that I think I gave one answer to your earlier question about what we can expect out of marriage from a biblical sense. But I think the other thing we can expect is mutual love and sacrifice.
Yes.
And so marriage is a very selfless posture.
Yes.
It's not about me. And so if my spouse is communicating something that is very important to them, how do I lean into loving them well and possibly even sacrificing to try to meet this need that they may have?
Yeah, which is biblical.
Absolutely.
So you said something in there, and I am curious, this idea of non-negotiable. Is it okay to have something that's non-negotiable? I feel like we hear a lot of times this idea of needing to compromise, needing to sacrifice. And I think those are good things. We just said, like, that's very biblical. But is it okay in a marriage to have something that's like, no, this is non-negotiable for me?
Is it okay? Right? And so here I'm back to without wanting to label, quantify, or qualify something as right or wrong.
Yep.
I would say it just is. And so sure, that is a personal choice to have a non-negotiable. I think non-negotiables are better served outside of the marriage space.
Okay.
So I think being able to have those conversations at the premarital state is very important.
Okay.
I think once we get into a covenant of marriage, right, I think it's more about how do the two become one? How do we align? And then it's always a possibility to align if two people are willing and their hearts are open to doing that work. And so I think it's okay. And I think it is a personal choice, but I'm not sure if that is a best practice within the scope of marriage.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I just wanted to hear your thoughts. And that does make sense to me. And I think back to, because once you're in marriage, and it is, as we talked about, it's a covenant relationship. It's not contractual. And so offering up this quote unquote non-negotiable almost seems that it could be served in a contractual way of, well, if you're not willing to step up to this non-negotiable, then like I'm getting out of my side of the contract.
That's right.
Which is not the biblical representation of marriage, as we've discussed. So having those non-negotiables really, really clear in the beginning, prior to the marriage itself, I think it is a great way to think about that.
I think so too, because I think if we're using the Bible as our compass, we're using the Bible as our grounding point, then I think anything outside of the Word of God, right, was fair for a non-negotiable. Yeah. But anything within the scope of marriage and within the sanctity of marriage, I think, we need to be willing to try to align and really seek God together.
Yes.
On that.
Yes, absolutely. So you're in marriage, you have shared your expectations, you are in alignment on them with your spouse, but someone's falling short on their end of the deal, which happens because we are sinners and we are imperfect and we we are not always, I know I do not always meet the expectation and the ideal that, Cody would want. And so I definitely fall into this category. So when that's happening in your marriage, where do you go from there? What do you do about that?
I'll start by saying that as marriages evolve, as people evolve, as the years go by, as the seasons change, kids, no kids, empty nester, there are expectations that will come and go, right? And our needs will change. And so I think being open to resetting expectations has to be a part of the deal. I mean, how do you stay married for 60 years with the same expectations, know? And so I think Dr. Henry Cloud, there's a quote that he says in one of his Boundaries books, which is like one of my absolute favorite tried and true resources. But it says that clear expectations are the foundation to a healthy marriage. And I believe that because, I know it to be true, right? But I think when we are misaligned or when the seasons change and now we're needing something that we didn't need before, and so our expectation has changed, I think we have to be willing to step up to the plate to have a clear, honest conversation. Yeah. And so it does happen. Yeah. But anything unspoken but expected in the realm of marriage is just not a best practice. And so we want to make sure we say those things. So
going back to your example of listing out, like making that kind of a regular practice in your marriage, I'm thinking, to your point, it's like people are going to be so tired of hearing me say this, but just so many light bulbs are turning on for me in a new season with a new child at home, right? And so, just reusing that type of exercise to say, okay, our expectations might have shifted a little. Absolutely. It was just us. It was the two of us. Now we're caring for, a daughter, and that brings a whole new level. And are there new expectations that have kind of, arose up that I wasn't thinking about necessarily beforehand?
Absolutely.
And maybe I am now. And rather than just holding on to those and letting them, fester and be unspoken, speaking those out and saying, hey, we've had a change in our family.
That's right.
Let's revisit this conversation.
That's right.
And kind of using that tool. And how cool if you get in that habit, as you have introduced more children, or you enter a season of maybe you are, going to adopt, or you're going to become foster parents, and then you've got this whole new dynamic, and even things as little as you're going to get a new puppy. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about the expectations around that. So I think that is such a good thing to consider, that as your seasons will change, there are some foundational things that, certainly will remain.
That's right.
But there are some things, there's maybe some preferences that might change that we need to kind of reevaluate.
That's right. I think anytime a couple is going through a transition, no matter what the transition, and I think you named some really, really solid just transitions in marriage. But I think the expectations do change, or a new set of expectations are now on the table, because you've got your parenting expectations now, I'm sure, that you have with this new baby girl.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where you have to begin to stay in constant communication around these topics, because now we've got this our plot thickens. And so we've got this new thing that we are trying to navigate. And so how do we do that well? And it's being able to put those parenting expectations on the table, right? Sometimes it's financial expectations, but it's naming those things and being able to get in alignment and to compromise where we need to, but leaning in so that we can love and support each other well.
That's a great example, I think, about the couple. What if you're like wanting to buy a house? Maybe you're in an apartment or you're renting or something, and you're wanting to take that new step, and it's like, okay, well, what's the expectation around this? Like, how much are we saving? What are we doing? How is this affecting our other, financial goals and things? And so, gosh, so many great ways that this foundational conversation can inform so many other conversations as well. I love that. Right. Okay, so biggest thing that trips couples up.
Okay.
in just relation to this conversation.
Yeah.
So it might be something you've already mentioned or said, but is there something that when it gets to this area that it really, you see, you're like, this keeps tripping couples up?
Absolutely. This is a fun question. And the first thing that comes to mind is what I'll share. But I think one thing that trips people up is expecting you of others. Right? So expecting you, what is central to you, what is important to you, what is foundational to you, expecting that of others. And so I think accepting people for their experience and for where they are. And then again, it's not that we need to be the same, because we're not, but how do we align? And how do I position myself so that I don't expect you to show up as I would, or to think as I would, or to move as I would. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay. Say it one more time. Expecting you
of others.
Of others. Expecting you of others. Wow. Ooh, that'll really challenge you
right
there.
No, seriously. Because when you begin to break down, sometime when there's a conflict in this area and you really begin to break it down, what really it boils down to often is, well, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't think that way, or right? And so when you're dealing with a spouse and two people, it's not always about I. You got to be able to lean in and see the other side.
Yes.
And what do I need to accept about that person?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Oof, that is good. That is really good. I want to end our conversation. What a great, fruitful conversation and discussion this has been. I've really enjoyed it. I would like to end with just a final piece of advice or takeaway or nugget. I feel like I already have so many that I've plugged away. I think my favorite thing you've said was the principle versus preference. I think that's something I really am going to hold on to and challenge, especially I think about that in a parenting season too, of like, is this a principle that our family is standing on? We will respect our elders or something. Is this a preference? Like, I want the closet to be organized this way, but like it's the closet being organized and this is a preference. So I think that is such a good one that I'm going to hang on to. But I know there were lots of good ones for those listening and watching that they'll probably grab onto, and just want to give you a final opportunity to share just a piece of wisdom or advice or final takeaway you have.
Sure. I've got a couple, but I'll start with, I think we are two becoming one, recognizing that we are all sinners saved by grace. We're all flawed humans. And so when you think of marriage expectations, even when you do the work to align, and when you do the work to sit and talk and really try to develop shared expectations, I think you have to know that we're not going to always get it right. And so I think just again, if we lean into the character of Christ and we really strive to be image bearers, then we have to be willing to seek and grant forgiveness often. And I think that is so important in this conversation, and we cannot leave that part out because we're not going to get it right. But being able and willing to forgive and to seek forgiveness is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay. Wow. Well, what a great conversation. What a great discussion. I feel like we just scratched the surface, honestly, because I feel like you could talk about expectations related to so many different categories, communication expectations, sexual expectations, financial, all of the above. And so maybe that's something we'll explore on this podcast in some later episodes. We can kind of dive in deeper onto a very specific expectation. But I'm thankful for how you just shined a light for us, generally speaking, on what this is, and just to help bring some clarity to this conversation that can feel tough and maybe frustrating and maybe a little scary or something. So it feels less scary to me now, and I just appreciated you sharing with us this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marlee.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure to sit with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning into this conversation with Genee on the WinShape Marriage Podcast, and we will catch you right back here next week. We hope that conversation blesses your marriage. If you're loving the WinShape Marriage Podcast, will you please take a moment to make sure you're subscribed? You may be a faithful listener and not realized you aren't subscribed. It really helps us out. Also, if you've enjoyed these conversations and they've impacted your marriage, please rate and review this podcast. One listener said, "Thanks so much for pouring into couples with godly wisdom and practical equipping.